Did you know that GBA connectivity almost had a bigger role in Wind Waker? Or that Olimar's wife was abusive? Or did you know that Mario Party was never actually intended to be a series? Lately, we've been crawling through hundreds of Japanese magazines looking for interesting tidbits to translate, and that's where pretty much all of today's info came from. We stumbled upon a few interviews for Gamecube games during our research, all of which were bursting with facts we'd never heard before. So unless you speak Japanese or lived in Japan in the early 2000s, you probably haven't heard any of the stuff in this video. Today we're going to focus on facts from a few Gamecube titles like Wind Waker, Pikmin 1 and 2, and a couple Mario games. So let's jump right in with a roundtable interview we translated all about Wind Waker from Japan's Nintendo Online magazine, their January 2003 issue to be exact. This interview is in two parts, with the first half featuring Wind Waker's director Eiji Aonuma, and key members of the game's audio team like composers Koji Kondo, Kenta Nagata, and Hajime Wakai, as well as sound effects programmer Masafumi Kawamura. The interview opens with a few things we've already talked about on the channel before, like how Aonuma thought about using a theremin as the game's main instrument, instead of a conductor's baton. After Aonuma mentions how they strived for high-quality, realistic audio, the interviewer asks if the team used actual seagull cries in their sound design. This is where Kawamura joins the conversation and starts bringing up details we've never heard before. He says, "It's actually not a seagull in the game. We tried using one at first, but it didn't really sound like a seagull, so we used altered elephant sounds. We also tried out a lot of other options, like mixing crocodile, camel, and lion sounds. For reference, this is what seagulls sound like in Wind Waker." We're not sure why a seagull doesn't sound like a seagull or how you turn elephant sounds into that, but it's all pretty impressive if you ask us. Then Kawamura mentions how they got a lot of their sounds from sound effect collection CDs, but that they do grab some of their own sounds out in the wild. "I wanted to record the sound of metal hitting a tree, so I hid a metal pipe in an instrument case and went out into the forest with it." He also adds that the sound of walking on sandy beaches were made by shaking a bag of potato chips. Take a listen. The team talks a little about how they were originally going to voice all the game's NPCs themselves, but it turns out they were, not good at it. Kawamura remarks that some of the staff gave good performances, and there were plenty of instances where they'd get good takes, but problems sprung up when they had to get recordings for unique situations. There were a few things where the staff gave good performances, but there are limits to what an ordinary person can do. Even if there's a script, it might just say "Oi," and even if you tell them to imagine yelling it out to someone 100 meters away, that's difficult for a regular person. Then the discussion falls to an important note about Wind Waker's development, that this is the first 3D Zelda game where Koji Kondo wasn't solely in charge of the music. In fact, Kondo helmed the music for basically every console Zelda game besides Zelda 2 up until Wind Waker. And with Kawamura, Wakai, and Nagata stepping up, they all decide to drop a little tidbit for us in the interview about what that was like. Kawamura says that before taking on the role, he'd heard that the only sound effect that carried over from A Link to the Past on the SNES to Ocarina of Time on N64 was the puzzle solved sound. So he made sure this was the only sound effect he carried over to the GameCube, to carry on the tradition, so to speak. This piqued our interest, so we went through every sound effect for both games, and although the puzzle solved fanfare is indeed the same, a bunch of other Ocarina sounds get reused in Wind Waker. The jingles for collecting a new item, opening a treasure chest, and collecting a heart piece are repeats, just to name a few. So if Kawamura's telling the truth here, some other devs carried over sounds too. Wakai says he didn't want to step up at first because he thought that if he helped make the game, he'd lose all the pleasure of playing it. Nagata, on the other hand, says he's always wanted to work on Zelda. And this part of the interview closes out with Aonuma talking about the power of music and how important it is to the feel of Zelda. He mentions that he's played builds of Zelda games in the past with no sound at all, and that it was actually painful and felt like the game might never be finished. But as soon as the audio's in, all that changes, and you understand the importance of sound. The next part of the interview centers on Aonuma and Toshiaki Suzuki, who led development on Wind Waker's GBA connectivity and the Tingle tuner. Before Wind Waker, Suzuki directed a bunch of stuff, like Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, Kirby Tilt and Tumble, and Super Mario Advance. But it's his work on Tilt and Tumble that caught Aonuma's eye. Basically, partway through Wind Waker's development, Aonuma realized he wouldn't be able to finish the main game if he spent much time on GBA connectivity, so he brought Suzuki in to take the reins. After the introduction, Aonuma jumps straight into a bunch of tidbits we've never heard before, like how the Tingle tuner concept came from Miyamoto saying, "Zelda's a single-player game, but dads want to play too, right?" Aonuma continued, "That stuck in the back of my mind, and I wondered if we could actually make something like that. Then I heard about the Game Boy Advance and GameCube's connectivity. That's when I came up with a plan for how dads and kids could play together. There was actually a point when I thought about making this a major part of the game, but that would mean you couldn't enjoy it if you didn't own a GBA, so we settled on the balance we have now." They elaborate on this a little more, and seem to say they wanted to let folks control Link on the overworld map using the GBA from the beginning. And the focus on maps made them start thinking about Tingle, since he's a map merchant in Majora's Mask. Then Aonuma says, "At first we envisioned it as walking around holding Tingle inside the GBA like an insect cage, but Tingle's a character with a lot of popularity within Nintendo. Ultimately, we expanded his role to appear in the main game too, and eventually to the point that Tingle has his own island in the main game." The devs all had their own vision of who Tingle was, so they had to come together and establish what it was to be Tingle. Suzuki gives an example of how he casually made a red and white costume for Tingle, and then was surprised when another dev said that those colors weren't very Tingle-like, since he wears green clothes to imitate a fairy. In the final game, we see white, pink, and blue Tingles in the form of Tingle's brothers, but never a red Tingle. One of the most interesting Tingle-centric facts divulged in the interview relates to Wind Waker's huge max wallet size of 5,000 rupees, which is 10 times the size of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask's biggest wallets. Apparently, this huge wallet only came about thanks to Tingle. Tingle gives you bombs and items in exchange for money. We made the wallet incredibly big to accommodate Tingle. It's the biggest wallet in the entire Zelda series. The interview closes out with Aonuma saying how he thinks this will be the last time he works on a Zelda game. "I think this might be the last time I'm personally involved with Zelda. I've already squeezed out every last drop of an idea to the point that even if they told me to make a sequel, I couldn't." Seems he changed his mind, because he's basically worked on nothing but Zelda since, being credited on over a dozen Zelda titles after Wind Waker's release. Wind Waker has a fair amount of interesting behind-the-scenes info, but another GameCube title has even more secrets hidden beneath the brush: Pikmin. But before we get to Pikmin, a word from this video's sponsor, Persona 5 Tactica. Persona 5 Tactica is a turn-based strategy role-playing game that takes place alongside the story of Persona 5. Revisit your favorite characters from the Phantom Thieves of Hearts, who've been transported to an oppressed alternate world and must team up with the Rebel Corps freedom fighters to revolt against the tyrannical Legionnaires. In Persona 5 Tactica, you can dominate the battlefield by keeping tabs on your foes and thinking on your feet. Set up combos in snappy, fast-paced battles using close quarters and ranged physical attacks, with long-range weapons being able to target multiple enemy units. Players control a party of up to 3 characters and can surround weakened enemies to pull off a special triple threat attack, capable of eliminating all foes in battle. The game uses a grid-based combat system, a weapon affinity system, and features staple mechanics from the Persona series like summoning and fusion. And speaking of Persona staples, Toshiki Konishi returns from Persona 5 to compose the game's catchy new soundtrack. For all this and more, check out Persona 5 Tactica, available on Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, Windows PC, PS4, PS5, Nintendo Switch, and Steam. Now, back to the GameCube facts. We recently translated Nintendo Dream's January 2002 issue, which has a great interview with Miyamoto all about Pikmin. And here he says that when he was a kid, he often engaged in quote-unquote cruel play. He'd put ants on a leaf boat and send them downriver. With Pikmin, he wanted to make a game where you can do that kind of thing virtually. And unlike most other video games, the creatures Pikmin kill aren't actually enemies. He says, "They're not really evil, they're just living their lives there normally. When you start the game, you think the creatures are evil, but as you progress, you think Olimar might be worse. And then in the end, you might think the Pikmin are actually the bad guys." It's a game where you can't make clear value judgments on the characters. He also mentions how Pikmin was almost a Nintendo 64 game, but the console was too underpowered. Then later, GameCube turned out almost overpowered. Quote, "We couldn't decide whether to make it for N64 or GameCube at first, but when we started testing it on the N64, we could only get 30 Pikmin moving on screen at a time. We thought it had to be on the GameCube, then we had 300 Pikmin moving around. Until recently, before release, we had 200 in-game, but it was hard to handle, so we reduced it to 100. In that same magazine, he goes on to say they thought about adding more puzzles but decided against it. This was because the game's opening shows Olimar's ship parts fall to the planet's surface, and it wouldn't make sense if they just happened to land on a bunch of puzzles. They also thought about every Pikmin having their own individual names and stats, but it would have been too taxing on the GameCube to generate all that data when a bunch of Pikmin popped out of an onion. They figured players would have lost track of their favorite Pikmin anyway, like maybe you'd grow an affection for Red Pikmin Steve, but pretty soon you wouldn't be able to find him. After the game was finished, Miyamoto says they changed some details in the American localization, like Olimar's wife beating him. We went through all the Japanese monologues to translate that Olimar quote, but it looks like it doesn't exist. Maybe Miyamoto was exaggerating, or Olimar's abusive wife was originally in the game but got removed, even in Japanese. We did, however, find that Olimar's wife isn't quite as sweet as you might have thought. She's depicted in a positive light in the English version, but in Japan she belittles him. Olimar says, quote, "My wife is always saying I suck at precise work." Another log says she's quick to anger, but in the English version it was changed to say it's Olimar's boss who's quick to anger, instead of the old ball and chain. Olimar also has a dream where she's literally forcing pick carrots down his throat, which was toned down in English. For better or worse, his wife's dark side was left intact in the English version of Pikmin 2. Speaking of the sequel, we translated another issue of Nintendo Dream from a few years later, where the devs spend 8 pages talking about Pikmin 2's development. They show a clay figure from back when purple Pikmin had tails. It was originally brought to Miyamoto for his approval, but the tails ended up getting cut. They also say the purples were originally a dark green color, but changed them because co-director Hino wanted a Pikmin type who looked like eggplants. The devs go on to say Louie was originally called Luzi to sound like the English word loser, but they ultimately changed that too. The other co-director, Abe, says they also considered making it so the longer it took you to beat the game, the interest on the company's loan would accrue higher and higher. The day counter goes from 99 to 100, then up to 1000, then 10,000, and so on. Every time a digit's added, the numbers get smaller, and eventually they're too small to read. We spent an hour going to Sunset over and over to show you 100, but ain't no way we're doing 1,000. A lot of Pikmin 2's treasures got changed in localization, like Japanese corned beef getting switched out for Skippy peanut butter, and the batteries changing from a Japanese brand to Duracell. We already covered those in a dedicated Pikmin video 10 years ago, and the brands got removed from the Switch port anyway, but there's one treasure swap we still want to highlight. In this magazine, they say the picture inside the time capsule is one of the devs' dogs, Gonchan, but in the original Japanese version, it was Chi-chan, the cat who belongs to Mr. Yamaguchi, who made all the promotional clay figures. For the most part, in the Japanese version, they used branded items that maybe didn't exist anymore, but were commonplace when the devs were kids. This is because Pikmin 1 was especially popular with women of all ages, so for the sequel, they wanted to target dad's demographic, guys in their 30s and 40s who'd be nostalgic for those old Japanese trinkets that don't exist anymore. Basically, the developer's own demographic. Pikmin fans have long speculated that the lack of humans in the series meant they'd long gone extinct, and Olimar was exploring a post-apocalyptic Earth. But maybe that's not actually the case. In this magazine, they note that areas in Pikmin 2 are the altered versions of the first game's areas. When the interviewer asked why, co-directors Hino and Abe said, "The areas aren't exactly the same, but we intentionally made them look similar to give a sense of déjà vu that you've been here before. Like maybe it is the same place, but time has passed and humans have interacted with them." The house in Pikmin 4 also seems to hint that humans aren't as extinct as maybe we once thought. So what's the overall theme of the Pikmin series? According to the clay guy Yamaguchi, it's a message that applies to both the game world and the players' real lives. Even in a world as cruel as this, you can't give up on living. But what does the big cheese Miyamoto think? In the September 2001 issue of Nintendo Online magazine, he said, "On screen, Pikmin are constantly born and constantly dying. It's a deep game that really understands how the world is a cycle of life and death. An existential game with a determined undertone. That's the philosophy the Pikmin team wants you to take away, especially after the game's turned off and you walk outside to touch grass." Now we're going to take a look at something that drums up a little less existential dread. Some newly translated facts about Mario Party 4. The info here comes from Nintendo Online Magazine's December 2002 issue, which has an interview all about Mario Party 4. Joining this time is the director of every Mario Party game up to this point, Kenji Kikuchi, as well as minigame director Shuichiro Nishiya, minigame designer Daisuke Takeuchi, art design director Yukinori Goto, and project coordinators Hiroshi Sato and Miyuki Hirose. Right off the bat, Kikuchi brings up how he never intended for Mario Party to become a series. It seems there were tons of ideas the devs had left over from the first game, so they pushed to make a sequel. Now here we are, 25 years and 18 games later. Mario Party 4's biggest change to the series was the entire game would now be 3D, so no 2D game boards. Early Mario Party titles on N64 had flat 2D game boards, but the power of the Gamecube meant they could do fully 3D boards, and this drove much of the devs' thinking during production. To emphasize this, they wanted to add one dynamic 3D element to each board, which led to the inclusion of the roller coaster in Toad's Midway Madness. Mario Party 4 also introduces a mechanic where players can change their character's size to either tiny or gigantic using mini or mega mushrooms. According to Daisuke Takeuchi, originally when characters ate mega mushrooms, they'd become so big that their models were completely enveloping the board spaces. And conversely, according to Yukinori Goto, he wanted to make the tiny characters so small that you couldn't even see the models on the board. But they realized that was a pretty bad idea, so they made the characters actually visible. The team's approach to mini-games was just as bold. They went and asked every single member of staff at the company, regardless of job title or rank, to come up with ideas for mini-games. Many submitted full explanations of how a mini-game should work, but others just sent in simple doodles or sometimes even just a one-line memo. And once all the ideas were collected, it fell to Takeuchi to decide which mini-games to make. Some games came with highly specific requests, like in the case of the swimming minigame Mario Medley, where staff asked him to use the same camera angles as Olympic swimming. So Takeuchi went out and rented a videotape of the Olympics and asked the devs working on it to recreate what they saw on the tape. At this point in the interview, the devs are asked about a fan-favorite minigame, Book Squirm, and how they came up with it. According to Kikuchi, he just wanted to try making it from a technical standpoint, saying it's the kind of game you just have to make and see how it feels to have the pages falling down on you before you know how it works. While all the devs are talking about minigames, Goto brings up a pretty big element of the game that got left on the cutting room floor. He said, "We added in a lot of small objects since the Gamecube can display them well, and we wanted to make use of that ability. At the first stage of planning, we had an idea to make the whole board a giant dollhouse, and what's left of that idea became the present room. The present room's where players can look at what they've won in the game's story mode, and it's pretty easy to see how all these designs might have once been a part of a big dollhouse game board." And just as a quick aside here, the description of Daisy's side table in the present room tells players not to peek at her journal. But if you want to ignore that bit of advice, you'll see that her journal is actually a Japanese copy of Mario Party 2. Another unique room in Mario Party 4 is the Extra Room. Takeuchi says the Extra Room is where substandard minigames go, and it came about after the team made the Beach Volley Folly minigame. It was so fun and engrossing that the devs would end up completely forgetting the game even had a board, and the matches would go on for ages. This is what Takeuchi meant by substandard, because it didn't fit the requirements for a Mario Party minigame, which needed to be short and sweet. But they didn't want to just throw the game away, so they made the Extra Room for minigames that could go on for a while. Project coordinator Hiroshi Sato believes that before they added in the Extra Room, the game wasn't up to snuff. They already had the tiny, huge size-changing mechanic and a bunch of other unique features, but the Extra Room was the final touch that made the game worthy of the title Mario Party 4. Back in our new N64 Facts Discovered video, a lot of folks really loved the insight and work ethic of Shugo and Hiroyuki Takahashi and their work on the Mario sports games. So today we're delving into another interview with the duo, all about the development of Mario Golf Toadstool Tour. The interview's from Nintendo Magazine's September 2003 issue, and features the Takahashis alongside sound director Masaaki Uno, and game coordinators Toshiharu Izuno and Kenichi Nishida. The article opens up with Hiroyuki talking about how one of the reasons they wanted to make Toadstool Tour was that the Gamecube basically didn't have any full-fledged sports titles at the time, but they also wanted to right some wrongs with Mario Golf on the N64. They were super confident in Mario Golf and thought families would enjoy playing it together, but that didn't quite work out. After Mario Golf came out on N64, Hiroyuki saw children playing it in the toy section of a department store, but to his dismay, the kids just couldn't figure out how to play it properly. This is why Toadstool Tour has the auto shots, where the player taps the A button to determine the power, then the computer handles the rest. In fact, all the shots in the game can be performed by just pressing combinations of A or B, simplifying even technical shots. Apparently, this system took about half a year to think up and refine through trial and error. The overall goal for Toadstool Tour was to make a golf game that captured the essence of Mario, encouraged families to play together, and was user-friendly for beginners. But they needed to provide enough depth for enthusiasts and avoid leaning too heavily into fantasy, fearing that might detract from the golfing experience. However, they also thought if they made everything realistic, it'd strip away the Mario essence, so a lot of consideration went into harmonizing these elements. At one point, Shugo tried pulling in assets from other Mario games to see how they'd look, and recalls thinking it'd be a good idea to use the water from Super Mario Sunshine, seeing as how it had great-looking water for the time. But when he put Sunshine's water into Toadstool Tour, it didn't fit at all, and he had to rethink his approach. Masaaki Uno talks about how the struggle to strike a balance between fantasy and reality seeped over into the game's audio too. If we used real sounds for when a ball falls onto the lawn, it would get dull. So we tried using bubble wrap, and with the sounds of water hazards, we filled a bucket with water and poured it into a glass ashtray in the conference room. Shugo and I spent a long time doing it all by hand, and they even show us a picture of the same ashtray in the interview. The developers also decided to include jeers so that if it wasn't your turn, you could at least impact someone else's. Another reason for letting folks boo their friends was that Hiroyuki didn't like the idea of just taking his turn then staring blankly as the ball flew. He wanted everyone around him to join in at every possible moment, even if that means being heckled by other players. He went on to say that when people think of golf games, they kind of have this static image in their mind of a course and someone just lining up and hitting a ball. But when you golf in real life, the environment is much more lively and dynamic. The team went to great lengths to make the experience authentic, so much that they even brought in a pro golfer to test the game. Just as well because some of the staff had never even played golf. Kenichi Nishida told NOM, "I've never played golf, but playing this made me think that golf is fun. I'd like to try it." Did you also know that DidYouKnowGaming is making an actual game that tests your video game knowledge, and that you can pre-order it right now? For more on that, check out the video on screen. Thanks for watching. See you next time.